He stood there, fists clenched, screaming like a banshee at 7 a.m. while his car sat frozen solid, completely encased in ice, glued to the driveway like a trophy of his own stupidity. The police came. The fire department came. No one helped him. He didn't know it yet, but this was only the beginning of the end. All because I refused to give him my garage key. If you've ever felt the bitter sting of being disrespected and underestimated, then you're going to love what's about to unfold. Welcome to Sweetest Revenge. Hit that subscribe button, tap like, and drop a comment telling me the pettiest revenge you've ever witnessed. Let's dive into a story where karma didn't knock. It kicked the door off the hinges. I still remember the day we moved into that townhouse. It was early spring, one of those days where the breeze carries a promise of better things. I had just landed a solid studio contract, the kind of gig you hope for when you've been grinding for years. My girlfriend, now my wife, was all smiles as we unpacked the first few boxes. We had finally made it. New place, fresh start. The house was simple but clean, 2 bedrooms, an attached garage, a tidy little yard that we planned to fill with herbs and flowers. For the first time in a long time, I felt like we had something stable. The place had character. Sunlight poured into the kitchen, and the floors creaked just enough to remind you it had a history. A good one. Or so I thought. That illusion was shattered on day one, thanks to our next-door neighbor. Let's call him Chad. It's not his real name, but if there was ever a walking, breathing definition of a Chad, he was it. Mid-30s, barely scraping 5 feet 5 inches on a good day, balding so bad that he tried to mask it with a military-style buzz cut that only made it more obvious. You know the type. Loud, insecure, aggressively average, but trying to project alpha energy. He introduced himself while standing between 2 vehicles that screamed compensation. A jacked-up, custom-lifted pickup truck that looked like it could crush small buildings, and a souped-up Honda Civic that looked like it belonged in a Fast and Furious knockoff. Both were parked in the shared driveway, even though there was a visitor lot right across the street. And both were too obnoxiously modified to actually fit in his garage, which, as I'd come to find out, was more of a gym/motorcycle showroom hybrid than a place for cars. "Hey man," Chad said, giving me that overly casual, bro-dude tone. "You need me to move one of the rides so the movers can get through?" I appreciated the gesture, at first. Maybe he wasn't so bad. Yeah, that'd help a lot. Thanks. No red flags yet. That came after the movers left. As we were bringing in the last of the boxes, Chad sauntered over with a beer in hand, like we were old friends. That's when he hit me with it. "Hey, just so you know, the last tenants used to let me park in their garage during winter. Mine's full of workout gear and my bike, and that truck's too tall for the door. I can toss you the garage code if you need it." I blinked. I hadn't even gotten my own garage code yet. And here he was, offering to share one with me. "Actually, I don't have the code either," I said. "Landlord hasn't passed it on yet." He frowned. "That's weird. My code doesn't work anymore either. Thought maybe they just changed it." Something in the way he said it gave me a weird vibe, like he was probing, fishing for access. I let it slide. Later that week, when I finally got around to chatting with the landlord, I casually mentioned the garage and the neighbor who offered to share it. That's when the Rayall story started to unravel. The landlord's voice dropped immediately. He told me, very directly, not to give Chad the key, the code, or any access to my garage. He explained that the previous tenants had been robbed just after Christmas. Electronics, holiday gifts, even sentimental stuff, gone. No forced entry. No real clues. But there had been whispers. Strong suspicions that Chad and his friends, his little beer-guzzling crew who lounged at the end of his driveway all day, were involved. Nothing provable, but enough to change the locks and reset everything before I moved in. So no, Chad wasn't just some annoying car guy. He was a potential thief, or at the very least, a professional-level manipulator. And from that moment forward, my view of him changed. Unfortunately, his view of me changed too. When he realized I wasn't going to let him bully his way into my garage, the nice guy mask slipped. Fast. The pressure started subtly. A few more, "Hey man, you sure I can't just use it during snow days?" conversations. Some thinly veiled guilt trips. Even his friends started chiming in, laughing it off like a joke, but always circling back to, "Man, you got all that space going to waste." Eventually, I told him no. Firmly. Directly. His reaction was primal. One Saturday afternoon, While my wife was out getting groceries and I was unloading a new desk into the garage, he approached me again. This time, with a beer in hand and that same smirk on his face. You really gonna let all that space go unused? I mean, come on, man. I said no. I replied, not even looking at him. That's when he snapped. You little bitch, he spat. You think you're better than me? Huh. Just 'cause you're renting some yuppie-ass townhouse? That garage should be mine. His voice rose. His friends stood up from their lawn chairs. For a second, I thought he was going to hit me. He tried to. He stepped forward, fists clenched, but one of his buddies grabbed his arm and held him back, laughing it off like it was just boys being boys. But I saw the fire in his eyes. The humiliation. He wasn't just mad. I had wounded his ego. And that was something he couldn't forgive. After that, things turned ugly. At first, it was subtle. I'd find beer cans on our lawn every other morning. The kind Chad and his buddies drank. Cheap, generic, and always dented. Then came the catcalls. My wife would come back from walks shaken, telling me that Chad and his crew had been whistling and making crude comments. I confronted him once. I told him to stop. He just smiled, leaned back in his folding chair, and said, "Boys will be boys, man. She's hot. You should be proud." I felt powerless, furious, but the cops wouldn't do a thing. I called the non-emergency line more than once, but the reports always went nowhere. Later, another neighbor let me in on something else. Chad's dad had been a local cop, and ever since he passed away when Chad was a teenager, the local force had given him leeway, looked the other way when complaints came in. He was a legacy, and he knew it. The harassment escalated. One night, we came home late to find his truck parked across the edge of our driveway, angled just enough to make pulling in a nightmare. We had to park 2 blocks down and walk home in the rain. Sometimes, he'd blast music until 3 in the morning, bass shaking the walls, my wife crying from exhaustion and frustration. I called the landlord, called the city, documented everything. Nothing changed. And then winter came, and with it, Chad's entitlement reached a new level. Winter hit harder than anyone expected that year. By mid-December, our neighborhood had turned into a picture-perfect postcard, rooftops dusted with snow, chimneys puffing like sleepy giants, and holiday lights twinkling in the early dark. But inside our home, it didn't feel magical. It felt like we were under siege. Chad was unraveling. With street parking restricted due to snowplows and the city finally cracking down on people like him using visitor spots as their personal lots, he was boxed in, literally. His jacked-up truck couldn't fit in his garage, and now he was running out of places to stash it. Every morning, I'd watch him from my window, pacing around his driveway, jaw tight, muttering to himself while trying to wedge his Civic between snowbanks. The guy was boiling over, and he blamed me for all of it. He never let it go. Not for a second. One morning, I found deep boot prints across our front yard, ruining the little snowman my wife had made on her day off. A week later, a small crack appeared in our kitchen window. A perfect circle, like a BB pellet had nicked it. Coincidence? Maybe. But it lined up too well with Chad's building resentment. And then came the final straw. It was just after New Year's. My wife and I had spent the weekend with her family and returned late Sunday night, tired but happy. As we pulled up to the house, something felt off. The yard was dark. Too dark. When we stepped out of the car, I noticed it immediately. Our Christmas lights, our little glowing reindeer, even the wreath on the door, all gone. Not just taken, ripped off, destroyed, stomped into the snow and thrown across the lawn like garbage. Wires snapped, bulbs shattered. A trail of shredded garland led right to the edge of Chad's driveway. And there he was, sitting in a folding chair, a beer in one hand, his stupid little Bluetooth speaker in the other, smirking like the Grinch on steroids. My wife burst into tears. That was the moment something in me broke. The months of trying to be the bigger person, of walking on eggshells, of telling her, it's not worth it, every time she wanted to report him. It all collapsed under the weight of her tears and his smug face. I didn't say a word that night, but I stayed up until dawn, sitting in the garage with the lights off, heart pounding like a war drum. I kept replaying everything. Every beer can, every catcall, every sleepless night, every time I had to comfort my wife while that bastard laughed with his friends. And finally, the words echoed in my head like a whisper from somewhere deep inside. Enough. That's when the planning began. I wanted justice, not jail time. I didn't want to stoop to vandalism or get physical. No, I wanted something worse. I wanted poetic revenge. The kind of revenge that burned slower than a matchstick in windless air. That humiliated him, exposed him, humbled him without ever putting a mark on his skin. And one freezing morning, as I passed by his Civic, a little import that he treated like a child, I had my idea. See, Chad may have bragged about his truck, but his true love? His pride and joy? That Civic. He had spent who knows how much money slapping on spoilers, wide-body kits, a stupidly loud exhaust that woke the neighborhood every morning, and the cheapest aftermarket lights you could find. He polished it obsessively, talked about it like it was a living being. One time, I overheard him tell his friend he'd rather wreck his truck than let snow touch his baby. Bingo. That Civic had to sit outside, exposed to the elements, because he couldn't use his garage. And that winter was shaping up to be one of the coldest on record. I had what I needed. The first night was reconnaissance. After everyone had gone to bed and the streetlights flickered like candles in the snow glow, I bundled up, slipped through my side door, and walked out with a flashlight. I checked for any security cameras. Nothing. Chad was too cocky to think he needed one. I peeked into his garage window, just to be sure. Yep. Workout bench, punching bag, motorcycle frame, no cameras. I timed how long it took me to walk from my spigot to his driveway. Not far. I even rolled out the garden hose to test the reach, then reeled it back up and stashed it in the corner of my garage. The forecast said the temperature would drop to minus 22 degrees Fahrenheit that weekend. Dangerous cold. Perfect. That Friday, I set my alarm for 10 p.m., dressed in layers, and waited for the neighborhood to go still. At exactly 10:27 p.m., I stepped outside and uncoiled the hose. I walked to the edge of my yard and carefully dragged it across the snowbank, crouched low, and aimed directly at the driver's side of Chad's Civic. The water pressure was good. I gave it a light misting, just enough to coat the windows, doors, and trunk. A thin sheet began to form, shimmering under the moonlight. I wound the hose back, dried it with a towel, and locked it in the garage. Every half hour, I returned. Midnight, 12:30, 1 a.m. Each time, I layered more ice onto that poor Civic, laughing under my breath like a mad scientist. The layers got thicker. The door seams vanished beneath crystal-like coatings. The tires froze to the ground. The wheel wells turned into icy arches. By 5 a.m., that car didn't look parked. It looked preserved, like a fossil of a poor life decision, encased in a frozen tomb. I went to sleep as the sun rose, smiling for the first time in months. The reaction? Biblical. It was around 7:15 a.m. when I heard the first scream. A deep, guttural roar that sounded like someone had just discovered their dog was stolen. I scrambled to the window, trying to look nonchalant. There was Chad, standing in his slippers, shirtless, stomping around his driveway like a lunatic. The Civic was covered in a gleaming shell of ice, thick enough to make it look like it had been dipped in glass. His friends began to trickle out one by one, laughing at first, until they realized he was serious. Bro, what the hell happened? Someone froze my car? This is crazy. They poked at the ice. One of them tried kicking it, winced in pain. Another idiot brought out a blowtorch, only to realize that open flame next to plastic trim wasn't the brightest idea. That afternoon, I called in sick, just so I could watch the chaos. The fire department came. One of Chad's idiot friends called them, claiming someone had sabotaged the vehicle. They took one look at it and shrugged. Not our problem. Then came the police. A female officer knocked on my door. I opened it with my best groggy face. Morning, officer. Everything okay? We had a complaint of property vandalism. Your neighbor thinks someone froze his car intentionally. You hear or see anything suspicious last night? I shook my head slowly. Not really. We've been keeping to ourselves. My wife hasn't been sleeping well with all the late-night noise lately. She nodded, her expression unreadable. All right, let us know if anything comes to mind. When she turned, I could swear she smirked. Chad was losing it. Over the next few days, the temperature stayed brutally cold, single digits during the day, plunging well below zero at night. The ice on his precious Civic didn't just stick, it thickened. Every ray of sun added a glaze of melt that refroze at dusk, making the layers denser. His car was no longer a car. It was a monument to failure, and it was driving him insane. On day 2, he tried using buckets of hot water. I watched from my upstairs window as he sloshed one after the other onto the roof and windshield, only to scream when the water instantly refroze, creating even more ice. A few hours later, he and two of his buddies brought out an industrial heat gun and a power drill. One of them actually managed to melt a little crevice on the trunk, but then the gun overheated and died. The drill didn't get far either. Chad tried drilling into the ice near the door handles and cracked the handle clean off. I had to bite down on a towel to stop from laughing out loud. He didn't know it yet, but this wasn't just an inconvenience. It was a psychological war. Every time he passed the Civic, he'd swear under his breath. I could see it in the way he stomped through the snow, the way he flared his nostrils, the way he glared at my house like I'd killed his dog. He never had proof. Not a whisper. And that's what made it worse. Because he knew. He knew I did it. But he couldn't prove a damn thing. And then, on day 4, the meltdown happened. Literally and figuratively. I came home from a late grocery run, parked in my garage, and started unloading the bags. Just as I closed the trunk, I heard it. A grinding, awful whine, like someone using power tools underwater. I looked over and saw the source. Chad, holding a sawzall. Yes, a freaking reciprocating saw, normally used for cutting wood, drywall, or maybe thick metal. He was using it to carve his Civic out of the ice. His buddies stood around him, laughing nervously while trying to help pry the driver's side wheel free. One guy slipped on a sheet of ice and landed flat on his back. Another one managed to saw through part of the rear fender before the blade snapped and flew into the snow. It was a beautiful disaster. I turned back toward my garage, locked the door behind me, and sat on the floor for a full 5 minutes, laughing until I cried. The next day, the front windshield was completely shattered. I don't know if it happened from one of his wild swings with a crowbar or just from the pressure and frustration boiling over, but it looked like a spider web, cracked from top to bottom. The side mirrors were bent, one tire had gone flat, and the Civic was still frozen to the ground. That was the moment I knew I had won. But I wasn't finished. No, not yet. The thing about revenge is that once you feel that sweet rush, that taste of victory, it's easy to get greedy. But I didn't want to overplay my hand. The beauty of what I'd done was its elegance. There was no mess. No damage from my end. No law broken. Just ice. Pure, silent, undeniable justice, delivered by Mother Nature and my garden hose. And I wanted to enjoy it as long as I could. So I doubled down on the psychological side. The next evening, I casually walked outside while Chad and one of his buddies were trying to hack at the ice beneath the tires with a pickaxe. Hey, I called out, holding a mug of coffee, bundled in a warm jacket. Everything all right? He stopped mid-swing, turned slowly. His eyes were bloodshot, lips chapped from the cold, hair matted with sweat. You know damn well what happened, he spat. I raised an eyebrow. Not sure what you mean. You froze my car, you little piece of... His buddy grabbed his shoulder. Dude, stop. You can't prove anything. That's when I smiled. Oh, I said casually. If someone did that, man, that would suck. I mean, with how cold it's been, even a light misting every 30 minutes or so could freeze something real solid. Hypothetically speaking, of course. His face turned beet red. He took a step toward me, and that's when I said it. You're trespassing, Chad. His foot paused midair. He looked down, realized he was standing on my lawn. I sipped my coffee. Happy New Year. Then I turned and walked back into my house, locking the door behind me. After that, things changed. Not in the way you might expect. Chad didn't retaliate. Didn't throw a brick through my window. Didn't yell at my wife. I think something broke in him that day. Maybe it was the realization that someone like me, quiet, calm, a renter, had outplayed him so completely. With nothing more than water and patience. He avoided me after that. Completely. Didn't speak. Didn't make eye contact. The music stopped. The beer cans disappeared. Even his buddies came by less often. His reputation had taken a hit. People saw him as the idiot who let his car become an ice sculpture, and no matter what he said, he had no proof of how it happened. The best part? A week later, the Civic finally broke free. The thaw had started, slow and uneven. But one afternoon, I heard the engine sputter to life, and I watched from the kitchen window as the car lurched forward like a zombie clawing its way out of the grave. The moment it rolled an inch, the rear fender, still warped from the sawzall, snagged on a chunk of ice and ripped off. Plastic cracked. A taillight shattered. I heard him scream again. Poetry. By late March, things returned to a strange kind of normal. The snow melted. The days grew longer. Chad mostly kept to himself. The Civic sat in the same spot, covered with a weathered tarp like a shameful secret. And then came the final twist. My work contract ended that spring. The project wrapped, and I got an offer in another city. Better pay, more stability, a clean break. My wife and I packed up our things and left that townhouse with bittersweet smiles. But the story doesn't end there. See, a few years later, I reconnected with my old landlord. He'd become a sort of friend, someone I respected. We chatted every now and then, and I told him about our new house, our growing family, life after the chaos. And one day, he dropped a bombshell. You remember Chad? Yeah, I laughed. How could I forget? Well, he's in jail. What? Yeah. Him and a couple of his buddies got caught robbing a convenience store just after the holidays last year. Masks, fake guns, the whole 9 yards. Got caught by security cams and left a trail straight to his house. I sat there for a moment, stunned. Then I laughed. Not out of joy, but out of relief. Because some people, they really do get what's coming. And some revenge? It doesn't even need a courtroom or a jury. Just a hose, a cold winter night, and a little patience. Spring had a strange way of making the townhouse neighborhood feel like a different world. Gone were the snowbanks and biting wind. In their place, wet sidewalks, blooming trees, birds returning to sing their relentless morning songs. But for me, it wasn't just a change in season. It was a reset, a release. After everything that happened with Chad, after months of his passive-aggressive war on our peace, my wife and I were finally free. We were moving. A new city, a better contract, a fresh start. But before we left, I made one last walk around the neighborhood. A quiet farewell. As I passed Chad's house, now oddly silent, with no truck in the driveway and the Civic still buried beneath its ragged tarp, I felt something surprising. Not anger, not even pride, just peace. He didn't win. He couldn't intimidate me. He tried everything: posturing, threats, harassment, petty cruelty. And in the end, all he got was a frozen monument to his own stupidity and a growing list of criminal behavior that would catch up with him soon enough. That final act with the Civic? It wasn't just revenge. It was balance restored. Not just for me, but for every neighbor who'd silently suffered under his ego, every catcalled woman, every beer can kicked off a lawn. It was justice, slow, cold, and unforgettable. We moved out 2 weeks later. The new place was beautiful, quiet, the kind of quiet that makes you realize just how loud your life had been before. My wife slept better. I stopped grinding my teeth at night. For the first time in nearly a year, we felt safe. We made new friends, started hosting dinners, put up holiday lights without fear of them being torn down. But every so often, in the middle of a calm, snowy night, I'd look out my window and imagine Chad standing in his driveway, face red, tools broken, sanity fraying, as his precious Civic slowly turned into an ice coffin. And I'd smile. About a year after we moved, I got a call from my old landlord, Greg. He'd been a solid guy throughout the whole rental. Professional. Fair. No nonsense. He kept in touch, mostly out of habit, but also, I think, because we'd been through something together. Survived the same storm. Jason, he said, chuckling into the phone. You're not going to believe this. I sat up straighter. What? Guess who finally got himself arrested? No way. Oh yeah, Chad and 2 of his friends. Tried to rob a convenience store just after Christmas. Idiots wore masks but forgot to disable the cameras, and one of them dropped a pack of cigarettes with his real name on it. Cops traced it back in less than 24 hours. I burst out laughing. Are you serious? As a heart attack. Got charged with robbery, vandalism, resisting arrest, and I think, 4 or 5 other things. They had priors, so it stuck. What about the Civic? Oh, he said, clearly enjoying the story. That thing sat out front until late spring. Eventually, he sold it for parts. Some high school kid came with his dad, loaded it onto a trailer. Probably paid less than $2,000. All that work, all those mods, for nothing. A long silence passed. You did a number on him, Greg said quietly. I don't know what you did, but thank you. Seriously. That meant more than I can describe. Because Greg knew. He'd heard the rumors. He knew about the harassment, the beer cans, the shattered decorations. He couldn't do much as a landlord, but he'd always kept a watchful eye. And now, the predator had become the punchline. The neighborhood had peace again, and I had closure. I never spoke to Chad again. Never saw him in court. Never got a letter. He vanished from my life the way every toxic person eventually does, loud at first, then silently forgotten. But I'll never forget the feeling of that first night, bundled in layers, hose in hand, spraying down his precious Civic under the pale glow of the moon. Not out of hate, not out of spite, but out of resolve. Because some people only understand one kind of consequence. And when society, neighbors, and law enforcement won't deliver it, sometimes you've got to get a little creative. Ice cold, quiet, untraceable, and perfectly deserved. If there's one thing I've learned from all of this, it's that revenge doesn't always have to be violent, cruel, or explosive. Sometimes, the best revenge is measured. It's thought out, controlled, calm. Because real power doesn't come from screaming or swinging fists. It comes from knowing that you're smarter, that you kept your integrity, and that you made your point without ever sinking to their level. Chad's punishment wasn't the frozen Civic. It was realizing he got outwitted by someone he underestimated, someone he thought he could walk over. And when he finally hit rock bottom, it wasn't my doing, it was his own. I just gave him a little push. So if you're dealing with your own Chad, remember this. Revenge is best served cold. Sometimes, quite literally. If that revenge gave you chills, hit that subscribe button for more real stories where justice is served in the most satisfying ways. Drop a like if you think Chad got what he deserved, and let me know in the comments. What's the most cold-blooded revenge you've ever seen? This is Sweetest Revenge, and I'll see you in the next one. Stay sharp, stay cold,